Hello and welcome to our podcast series for National Insect Week 2014. Today we're joined by Richard Comont of the Bumblebee Conservation Trust and the UK Ladybird Survey. He's particularly involved in biological recording and citizen science. So, Richard, could you explain to us the concept of citizen science and what your day-to-day work involves?
Hi Chris. Well, I suppose overall citizen science is about involving ordinary people, so the citizens, in the process of science, not just restricting it to the ivory towers of academia here in Oxford, but actually getting out, and mostly it's using people to record their sightings. So particularly I'm interested in wildlife recording. So we've been doing it in Britain for hundreds of years. The earliest record that we've got in the Biological Record Centre dataset dates back to about 1640-ish for a butterfly. And it's really that ongoing process of biological recording is particularly what I'm interested in.
So when you say the citizen, this means that anybody can go out and collect data for you and you can use this?
Absolutely anybody, anywhere essentially. It's all about people recording what they see in their back gardens when they're out and about on their daily basis. And if enough people are doing that, we can really build up a picture of how wildlife is doing across the country as a whole.
So in your work with citizen science, what are the aims of your projects?
Essentially, our aim is to monitor what's going on with various bits of Britain's wildlife. We know from things like the Butterfly Monitoring Scheme, which is a different citizen science project, that butterflies are declining. We don't have funding to go out and deploy teams of ecologists across the country to go out and count butterflies at each site. We have to find another way, and the best way that we can find that is to use the people that are already there. The British public in general are surprisingly good at identifying birds and bumblebees and butterflies and that sort of thing. We have a massive network here that no one else in the world has, and through that we can really work out what's going on with a surprisingly high proportion of Britain's wildlife.
So is your work yielding results already? Have you found anything out so far?
Yeah, I've actually just finished my PhD, which has been working with the UK Ladybird Survey, which, as the name suggests, is a citizen science project monitoring the 47 different species of ladybird that we've got in Britain. And we get about 16,000 records a year from volunteers. There's a lot of people out there who are interested in ladybirds and send us records of, in the summer, of ladybirds in their gardens, in local parks and that sort of thing, and increasingly in the winter of ladybirds in great big aggregations in their kitchens and in their bedrooms. They're not quite so pleased about those ones. But yeah, from those, because we have so many records, we've got 150,000 records or something in the dataset, we can look on a national scale at what's going on across time. Our earliest record is of a 13-spot ladybird from Oxford in 1819. So we've got a really nice span of time. We can see what's going on across time with these things. It's not just, this is year one, this is year two. We've got a real volume of data that means we can actually find out what's going on over the long term and look at things like environmental change. Most of what we know about climate change, for instance, in this country comes from biological recording because we can see things moving north.
If you were going to state your key results, what the exciting results to come out of your work is?
The really interesting thing that I've been working on so far is the spread of the Harlequin Ladybird. And this is a Japanese species of ladybird which was introduced into continental Europe during the 1980s and early 1990s. And we've been able to monitor its spread across the country entirely with citizen science. And from that we've been able to compare that to environmental factors, to habitat factors, to climatic factors, and just look at the impact of this invasive species, essentially by being able to deploy this vast network of volunteer recorders just telling us what ladybirds they've seen where.
So, how is the harlequin impacting our native ladybirds?
Basically, it's eating everything it comes across. In a brief sentence. It's really not fussy, and because it's everywhere, in really big numbers, it's having quite a significant effect on native species. The two main drivers of local extinctions in ladybirds that we found from that paper were overlap with the Harlequin ladybird, both spatially and temporally, so if you're in the same place as it is at the same time, you're liable to be declining more, and also percentage urbanisation. So we think of ladybirds as being quite suburban insects. You find quite a lot in your back garden, but actually there's 47 species of ladybird in Britain, you'll find maybe half a dozen in your back garden. So it's good for those species, but for the group as a whole, it's not so good.
This harlequin really does just consume and outcompete our native ladybirds.
It's a really voracious predator, and it has 2 or 3 generations a year, so it just eats everything, and that includes all the aphids, which otherwise native ladybirds will be eating, but it also includes the larvae of native ladybirds themselves, if they can't run away quickly enough.
How did you come to work with insects? How did you get into this line of work?
I've always been interested in wildlife more generally. So I spent a lot of time growing up on my grandparents' farm down in mid-Devon. My dad was county council ecologist for Bedfordshire, and before that he worked for the Bedfordshire Wildlife Trust. So it's always been in the family. So on a weekend we'd go out and try and see purple emperors at the local forest and that sort of thing. There's no sort of starting point because it's always been there. I started rearing butterflies when I was about 4, and I've been doing it ever since.
The classic entomologist, boyhood bug hunter then.
Just never grow up, basically. Keep doing the same thing.
So during your research for your PhD and now with the Bumblebee Conservation Trust, what stands out to you as your most memorable insect encounter?
Well, probably my favourite insect encounter over the last few years is actually one that is heavily involved in citizen science, but it was outside any of my PhD work. It was actually on a BioBlitz down in South Devon. So it was the opening of a new East Devon District Council wildlife reserve down at the Axe Estuary, and so as part of that I'd gone down to lead insect events on the BioBlitz, taking people out and showing them what wildlife they can actually find in a place like that, in their back garden essentially. And we came across this very odd looking ladybird larva, and so I didn't recognise it, so I thought this is weird, and took it back in and reared it up, and it turned out to be the larva of a 13-spot ladybird, which you get a couple turning up on the south coast as migrants from France, but that was the first larva that had ever been found in Britain. It had been thought to be extinct for about 50 years here. That was a really exciting thing to find.
So this was a real rarity that you found. This is an exciting day in the life of a biological recorder.
Very much so, yeah. I identified it in the lab and then did a little happy dance around the microscope.
What's the plans for the future? You've just joined the Bumblebee Conservation Trust.
Yeah, I started the Bumblebee Conservation Trust a couple of months ago, and I'm leading their citizen science schemes now. So we have 2 big citizen science schemes. BeeWalk, which is casual records, so people find a bee, photograph a bee, they can put it up there, they can get help with identifying it, they can help us by identifying the other photos that are up there. And so we're actually crowdsourcing the ID, which is a really interesting thing for the future, essentially. But also, we have a standardised survey called BeeWalk, and that's where people go out once a month from March to October and walk a set route and record all the bees they see and how many of each species. So that's essentially the next level up in citizen science. You can get a huge amount from casual recordings like the UK Ladybird Survey, like BeeWatch, but from things like BeeWalk, which is modelled on the butterfly monitoring scheme, we have a much better idea of abundance of things. So obviously, if you're declining as a species, your numbers are going down before you disappear from an area. So it gives us that early warning. And also, crucially, it gives us essentially true absence data. With casual recording, if you see something is recorded, that's great, that's a positive record. If something isn't recorded, there's 2 reasons why that might be. The species might not be there, if there's people looking for it, but there might just not be people looking. So the advantage of these standardised fixed effort surveys like BeeWalk are there was someone there looking. And so if they don't record something, that's because they didn't see it. And that's really, really important for things like evaluating the effect of conservation measures, general policy stuff, just having a better idea of how wildlife is doing, because you can say something wasn't there on that date.
Citizen science even adds a new level of resolution to biological data that researchers can use and wouldn't be able to have access to without.
Oh, a huge amount, yeah. I mean, if we didn't have citizen science and volunteer recorders going out and recording what they see, we would basically have no idea what's going on with wildlife. Biological recording is policymakers' window on the world. Without that, we have nothing.
Well, Richard, this was absolutely fascinating insight into citizen science and biological recording, so thank you for joining us.
No problem. Thanks for having me.